I want to share a story that's in the book because I feel like this encompasses our responsibilities. Um, I was working at this tubing company, okay, and it was I was and I had a newspaper, so I was working like 80 some hours a week, and I was I was it was I was exhausted. Anyway, it was a rough time for me, and I was I'd put I was put all these efforts in and trying to get this newspaper off the ground and trying to get it profitable, and then I was working this job to support myself and support the newspaper. Anyway, and I work 12-hour shifts at this point. Anyway, and so I get a text from my mom, who was living with my grandmother, who was about 97 or 98 at the time, and she was living with her and taking care of her. And she sends me this text. And she says, "Hey son, your grandma and I miss you. We really want you to. Can you come in for dinner?"
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this is in the middle of wintertime. It's extremely cold. Okay, so it's already dark at this point. I've got to work the next day, um, and I'm like, I really don't want to. And she says, "Well, your grandma and I really want to see you." And anyway, and so something inside of me was just like, okay, all right. And it was several miles further than what I needed to go home, which was,
Okay.
it wasn't like it's on my way home, right? So we're talking like another 15
Yeah.
miles one way to go,
In the dark, cold.
yeah, in the dark, in the cold, right? After I've worked 12 hours and I'm exhausted. So, so I'm making this trip in, I'm driving along, and it's one of those nights that's so bitter cold that you don't even really want to be outside. You don't even like to walk from your
Yeah.
car to to your house to the car. And I'm just, really completely lost in self-thought. And I'm driving along, and I see this person walking on the side of the road. And I immediately said this prayer, and I said, "God, it's so cold, Lord, please help him." And immediately this voice came into my head and said, "Why don't you help him?"
Hmm.
Just like that. And it was as clear as if somebody was sitting in the truck with me when they said it. Anyway, and that was enough for me to like, yeah, why don't I pick
Little
him up?
wake up
What?
call.
Anyway, and all of a sudden it became this, maybe it is my responsibility. I don't know. And so I turned around and I drove and I stopped, and I turned around and I went to, drove back a little bit because I was about a half a mile past him by this time. And anyway, and he jumps in the truck, he opens the door and jumps in, and he puts his hand out like I thought he was going to shake my hand. Anyway, and his and he has this $20 bill, and he puts it in my hand. And what I remember most was his hands felt like I had touched an icicle.
Oh
That's how
man.
cold it was. And he said, "If I had more money, I would give it to you." He said, he goes, "I've been praying to God that somebody would pick me up." He goes, "I thought I was going to," and this is what stuck with me, is he said, "I literally thought I was going to die." That's how cold it was. And so I said, "Oh, I don't want your money. I'm going this way anyway." Anyway, and I said, "Where do you live?" And he said, "I live about 3 more miles up, and then about a half a mile off the highway." And I said, "Okay." And so I said, I said, as I was driving in, I don't remember seeing a car broken down. Why, how did you end up walking? And so he tells me this quick story about how he and his girlfriend were that they had, that he lived with his parents. He was about 22, maybe at this kid was. It's about 22, and he lived with his parents. And he said, he goes, "I don't have a car," and he said, "I drive my parents' car to work every day," and he worked probably a similar type of job that I did. He was dressed in like he had like a manufacturer's, kind
Mm-hmm.
of shirt and pants on and boots. And and he said, and my parents' cars broke down. And he said, so my girlfriend picked me up this morning and took me to work. And he said she picked me up and we got into a fight on the way back. And he said, I went in, we stopped at the convenience store, which was, about 3 miles past where I had picked him up,
Wow.
and he said, I went in to get something. And he said, we were in an argument and she left me. So he said, I came back out, and he said, this store closed about at 9 o'clock. And he said, so I knew And he said it would do no good to call my parents because they had no way to come and get me.
Yeah.
And he said I didn't have anyone else to call, and so I am thinking. And he said I tried to pay people when they would come up. I'd say, "Can you please give me a ride? I live about 6 miles from here," and nobody would take him. And he said, "I'll give you $20 right now. You know, that's all I have. I'll give it to you if you know." And they were like, and he said, "No one would take me." And he said, so I began to realize. And he said there was a woman who was probably in her like early 60s working in the convenience store, and he said she was not going to take me home. And he said that she sort of had made that kind of clear that I needed to find a way home. And so he's like, I thought I can do this. It's cold, but I think, you know, he goes, I'm young and I can, you know, I'll hoof it and I'll make it. And he said, but you don't realize how much the cold takes out of you. And so he said, 3 miles in, halfway there, I knew I was in trouble. And he said, you know, that's when I really started praying, because he goes, I knew at that point I wasn't going to make it. Anyway, so I tell you that story, you know, to tell you that that was a clear message to me that something could have seriously happened, and that he could have died. It was that cold outside. He could have died. And whose fault would that have been? And whose responsibility would that have fallen on? I mean, was it his girlfriend's? Was it mine? Was it every single person that drove by that didn't pick him up? Because somebody should have accepted the responsibility to pick him up. Somebody did, and no one did until I did. And I wasn't going to until God said, you know, why not you? Why is it not your responsibility? Those are very powerful words, right? That's one of the stories that I use to back up what my belief system, what I believe now, is that what would have happened if you know, on the next day it would have come out on the news that there was someone who was found dead, you know, on the side of the road that had frozen to death, which does happen, and you do read that in the news. You do read that those things like that happen, and what would have been? Would I have even given it a second thought if I would have thought, man, I drove by there last night. Is that guy I saw? And how would I have felt about that?
Yeah.
When you start to look at life that way, it changes your perspective, and it should. Okay? Because every single person that night had a responsibility to their sibling,